Welcome to Frightening Fiction, the YouTube channel dedicated to all things horror. If you're a fan of scary stories and spine-tingling thrills, then you've come to the right place. Today's story is called The Shadow People, a heart-pounding tale of urban legends and overcoming fear. It was a dark and stormy night and Jessica was home alone, the eerie silence of the house only broken by the occasional flash of lightning and the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. She had always been a bit of a scaredy-cat and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, but as she settled into bed, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. She rubbed her eyes, convinced it was just a trick of the light, but when she opened them again, the figure was still there. It was tall and slender, its features obscured by the darkness. Jessica's heart raced as she watched it, too terrified to move. As she lay there, frozen with fear, the figure seemed to shift and move closer. She let out a terrified scream as it reached out towards her, its long, slender fingers inches from her face. She closed her eyes, waiting for the cold touch of death, but it never came. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone. She let out a sigh of relief, telling herself it was just her imagination. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The next morning, Jessica tried to brush off the incident as a nightmare, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She felt like she was being watched and she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow figure was still there, lurking in the corners of her vision. She tried to ignore it, but as the days went on, the shadow people seemed to be everywhere. She saw them in the corners of her eye, lurking in the shadows and watching her every move. She started to become paranoid and anxious, convinced that they were out to get her. One night, as she was walking home from work, she heard a faint noise behind her. She turned, her heart racing, but there was no one there. She was about to write it off as her imagination when she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun around, her eyes wide with fear, but there was no one there. She was alone on the deserted street, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. As she neared her house, she saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was one of the shadow people, its featureless face staring at her. Jessica let out a terrified scream and ran for the safety of her home, locking the door behind her. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't just sit and wait for the shadow people to come for her. She did some research and discovered that the shadow people were a type of urban legend, creatures born of fear and folklore. She realized that the only way to get rid of them was to confront them head-on. She gathered all of her courage and headed back out into the night, determined to face her fears. As she walked the streets, the shadow people seemed to follow her, their presence looming over her like a dark cloud. She tried to ignore them, focusing on her mission. She knew she had to find a way to banish them for good. She searched the city, talking to everyone she could about the shadow people and their origins. She learned that they were attracted to fear and that the only way to get rid of them was to face them head-on and show them that you were not afraid. Jessica knew what she had to do. She had to face the shadow people and prove to them that she was not afraid. She headed back to her house, the shadow people following close behind. She took a deep breath and turned to face them, her heart racing with fear but her expression determined. "I know what you are and I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice shaking slightly but her resolve firm. "You can't hurt me. I won't let you." The shadow people seemed to pause, as if surprised by her bravery. Jessica stood her ground, her eyes locked on the figures. After what seemed like an eternity, they began to fade away, disappearing into the darkness. Jessica let out a sigh of relief, her knees shaking with adrenaline. She had done it. She had faced her fears and vanquished the shadow people. As she headed back to her house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. But this time, it was different. It was a feeling of peace and calm, as if the shadow people were watching over her, protecting her. She knew that they would always be a part of her life, a reminder of the power of fear and the strength it takes to overcome it. But she also knew that she was stronger than they were, and that as long as she kept her fear in check, they could never hurt her. The shadow people were gone, but Jessica's journey was just beginning. She had faced her fears and come out on top, and she knew that she could face anything that came her way. She was ready to take on the world, one scary legend at a time. The END. Thanks for watching another episode of Frightening Fiction. If you enjoyed the chills and thrills, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a scary story. Until next time, keep it frightening.